So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this MAIA final conference. My name is Soila Anonen. I come from the Finnish Environment Institute, and it is my great pleasure to invite you all. And as you probably are aware, we have a two days conference, and today our focus is on innovation task and a bit more on the research side, and tomorrow we will hear more about these policy applications. Okay, so today we will have several presentations and coffee break in between, and I will first introduce our first speaker, who is Alejandro Caparros, who has been sharing this innovation work package together with me. So Alejandro Caparros, welcome. And just to let you know that after each speech, we will have a time for questions, and I will guide you through that session. And those who you are online, you are able to raise your hand there or pose a question to the chat, and we will take care of those as well. So welcome all.
So thank you very much. I think you hear me with this. Is working? Thank you. Perfect. So as Soila just said, I'm going to give an overview of the MAIA's innovation task outcome, which is work package 4, which was focused on the innovation that we have done, so in the more scientific part of the project, if you want. In particular, I will be summarizing what is our last deliverable, which is deliverable 4.6, which is the final report on progress made with innovations in MAIA and contributions to the implementation and development of a global standard for SEEA EA ecosystem accounting. So this is a summary they're going to make. If you are interested in this deliverable, you have a more extensive summary of everything what we have done, and then of course you have the different deliverables for the different tasks that I'm going to be mentioning. So in particular, we had this divided into 5 different tasks, and this presentation is going to be quite short, so I will not be able to give a lot of insights from each of them, just basically mentioning them. Unfortunately, in 13 minutes or 14 minutes, it's very difficult to talk about so many different things. In general, I think that we have covered all the issues that we had proposed ourselves. Everything was in the description of work has been done, and we have gone beyond that. So I think we can be very proud of what we have done, and this I'm going to go through the different tasks in more detail, but as I said, unfortunately, I will not be able to give any details because of lack of time. So as I said, we have 5 tasks, and I'm going to go through each of them one by one. So the first one is modeling water regulation services in support of ecosystem accounting. As you know, water regulation is considered one of the main regulation services, and in SEEA, and in this it includes things like water retention, storm and high water protection, and other particularities that you can see there. So what we did here in MAIA was a review of existing modeling approaches for water regulation. So basically it was a systematic review of research trying to identify models of water regulation services, and the main characteristic of these models, and the main characteristics in terms of ecosystem accounting. One of the key messages coming out from this systematic review is that most of the work has been done in biophysical terms, and the monetary ecosystem accounting has been less developed in case of water. This is in fact true for other areas as well, but this is something that we have identified here. Basically, we have been studying studies from all over the world, so it has been a compilation of different studies going into detail, and then as you see, you can separate into monetary, physical, the types of services, so you have an in-depth analysis if you are interested in, as I say, a brief summary in delivery 4.6, and then you would go to delivery 4.1, where you will have much more information about this systematic review that I'm mentioning. So then we have a second task, task 4.2, which was exploring big data sources for quantifying cultural services. So big data applications in ecosystem accounting includes the use of remote sensing data for extent and condition account, as well as various social media platforms that can provide data on people's physical location, activity, and preferences. So you can use databases like Flickr, you can use different social media to get information what people are doing, what their preferences are implicit. So this big data from social media platforms provide an opportunity to produce new, spatially explicit, that's very important, statistic on cultural ecosystem services, which one is the hardest bit to do. So here you get information on what, and the people, through their use of the social media, they show you their preferences for different cultural ecosystem services. For that, it was necessary to do a novel conceptualization of cultural ecosystem services in the context of big data within the SEEA, and there has been several applications of this methodology in the Netherlands. Big data, the problem it has is difficult to interpret simply because there's a lot of information coming on, and basically you need some tools to be able to understand all this massive information. So it's not that you don't have information, you have too much information if you want. So for that, what the team has done is go into artificial intelligence, or IA, and use the social media combined with IA-based models for landscape quality, and they have applied this in Great Britain. In general, the results are very promising, and the team has been satisfied with the results obtained. And as I said, if you're interested, you can go to the deliverables to get more information about that. So then we had, so this was so on task 4.12, and now moving on already to task 4.3. This one is valuing ecosystem services and ecosystem assets. So this is the most, or the only part that we have really on monetary accounts. There we had a set of studies done on monetary accounts. Most of the rest are going to be in biophysical. This afternoon I will give another presentation where I'll go a bit more in detail on the simultaneous exchange value, which we have applied in Andalusia, in Spain, and has also been applied in Oslo. So basically the simultaneous exchange value is an extension of the approach proposed in the SNA of using prices from simulacres where they don't exist. And what we have done with our applications is basically show that, well, this method can be applied at a large scale, can be applied in an area like Andalusia, which is like a small country. And we have also worked in the last year on developing more the theory behind this method. So it was there for a long time. It has been proposed in 2003, 2017, but now we have moved into giving more theory behind it. So we have also worked on other parts of the monetary ecosystem accounts, like intermediate products and own intermediate consumption in monetary ecosystem services, and the role of enhancement, degradation, and different assumption asset accounts are also discussed. Here you have a paper, so you have a whole set of papers where if you go to the deliverable, you will have the precise references, and there you can go get more information. So as I said, we talked about intermediate products, intermediate consumption. We talked about assets, enhancement, degradation, and another publication as well. And the particularity of this work done in Spain has been that we use a different method than SEEA initially. It is very related, but it was initially different, simply because it was developed before SEEA. But now we have adapted it, and in the last papers that I mentioned here, and that you can also find the references, there is a clear distinction, what is the similarities and differences with the SEEA. And basically there's a complete convergence, or almost complete convergence between the two systems. So basically now we simply say we are applying SEEA because it's the same thing. So in the last papers, we are simply mentioning that we are applying SEEA. Another place where we have had ecosystem service, ecosystem accounts in monetary terms has been in Oslo, in Norwegian. Here they have alternatives for the evaluation of stormwater retention services for urban ecosystem accounts is what we did there. So there we have physical and monetary accounts for changes in Oslo built zone over the period 2015-2019. And here it's also an application of the simulated exchange value with different methods, but basically the same idea. And then an institutional design simulating a stormwater retention fee is proposed here. So the stormwater runoff level depends on the rights allocation of assumptions that properties are responsible for runoff from the property. So basically with the simulated exchange value, you need to establish property rights in some way, which is reasonable, which is as realistic as you can, and then you simulate the form of payment. That's what they have done in Oslo with what is the most appropriate for their case. We did it in Andalusia differently, but simply because the circumstances are different, you have to adapt it in each case. So for that, they used a combination of monetary evaluation methods to simulate this fee that would cover the full municipal cost of stormwater runoff. So there are the collection and treatment cost of combined stormwater overflow. There's the future cost of expanding CCO costs to meet the runoff with climate change, and water pollution cost of unmitigated CCOs. So basically, you simulate what the market would do with the information that we have, and you do it the best way you can. You can do it with it basically for recreation and other issues. As I said, it was very brief for Andalusia because I will develop it this afternoon. But in Oslo, they did it for stormwater retention services. So in Oslo, they also worked, the MAIA team also worked on how to generalize information from one area to a whole accounting area, from one particular study. This is something very generally important, not only here, it's a general problem. And what they use is a Bayesian network for this, using regulation surface from municipally managed trees to all the tree canopy of Oslo in Norway. So basically you have the information from some area and you want to expand it. This is very general in ecosystem, a big problem, and they have used Bayesian network for this. So here you see a little bit more of the details, but as you see, this is a topic I don't really know a lot about it, so you have David to ask if there's any question about it, but you have the deliverables where everything explained in much more detail. So the third approach that we had on the monetary part was done in France, basically. So the use of retention and maintenance cost approaches as an alternative indicator to SEEA recommendations for computing exchange values is discussed and applied to marine ecosystem in France. So here we have cost-based approaches aimed to assess the cost required to protect the ecosystem, but also the cost of in-kind restoration of the degradation of natural capital. So to maintain a constant of natural capital at a relevant scale. So you need what you want to maintain, and for that they use the ecological status defined by the Marine Strategy Directive. And then at the end, what they're looking for is an ecological debt. It is the net present value of the projected difference between the restoration costs needed to bring ecosystem condition to good ecological status, as just defined before, and the current ecosystem maintenance cost. So this is what they call an ecosystem ecological debt. Again, if I said something wrong, please, you have here the expert who can explain it in more detail over there. So I had to cover many things here, so I'm very unsafe ground, unfortunately. So now we have another task 4.4 on biodiversity accounting. So here the SEEA again, biodiversity accounting is very prominent in the SEEA, and we have worked significantly on trying to see how to improve this in the future. Unfortunately, what has been identified, there are limited real-world applications for this for the moment, but they are increasing as we speak. And basically here the distribution has been trying to answer a couple of important questions. That has been the basic approach of this task. One of them, how can existing national biodiversity monitoring process be adapted for informing and accounting for biodiversity and ecosystem condition accounting? So you have, again, more information in the deliverable, but basically it says that you can use existing reporting issues like the EU Nature Directive, you can use the red list, and you can use species abundance and richness accounts developed from national biodiversity monitoring data to inform ecosystem condition and cultural services. And you can also use, if you do the appropriate work, the structured frameworks such as the ELITE index in Finland or the BECA in Norway. You can adapt them to SEEA. So basically, we don't need to start from scratch. That's the basic idea. As I say, you have more information in deliverable, but that's the basic idea that we can, in fact, use what we have done in the past for ecosystem accounting. The second big question is what specific biodiversity data items could be included in SEEA accounts for better guiding decision on biodiversity policy. So here they're going back to the work on France and Germany on biodiversity debt that we were mentioning before. That's prominently important for underinvestment and budgetary investment to be determined. So I think it is very related to what we said before. This concept of biodiversity debt is very related to what we mentioned before. There are also some work on protected area accounts. There has been also a paper which is still ongoing that has been developed within the colleagues of MAIA, so to see how you can use SEEA for a particular case of protected accounts. And there you have very strong relationships with biodiversity, of course. So in general, the idea here is that if you do this science-based policy targets, we can provide relevant information for policymakers. So once more information on that, you can go to the deliverable. In any case, the general message is that here definitely there is a need to further experimentation and development of extending application of SEEA to mainstream biodiversity into planning processes. So we are at the beginning. It is possible to do it, but we need to improve this. It can be useful for decision making, but we need to improve this. This is the basic messages. And then now coming to the last task, 4.5, in piloting marine accounts. I think I have a little bit over time, but I hope not too much. So here we have, well, as you all know, the capacity of an ecosystem to provide services for human depends on the area covered, extent and its quality condition. And for that, you have to have a reference point. And we have had two methods of trying to apply this within MAIA, one in Finland, one in France. I will give a little bit of detail. So the Finnish case study, there was an ecosystem extent that was assessed using extensive underwater inventory collected by the Finnish inventory program with about 170,000 sites. And with this information, they provided this biophysical accounting. So by using SDMs, the geographical distribution of key species producing ecosystem was assessed. So here is in biophysical terms, you will get more information in later presentations about this. So they have some effects on human activities, such as coastal construction, dredging, dumping, etc. But basically, they focus on the biophysical part in all these applications. In France, we have the French case study. They have a system of accounts which contains 3 categories of information. In the picture to the left, the names have changed. But basically, the final one is that you have, on the one hand, the functionality dimension, so the ability of the ecosystem to maintain the overall functionality over disturbance, the heritage dimension, the conservation study of species and habitats, and the capacity dimension, and the capacity to sustain, provide goods and services. So with this in mind, they have again estimated the physical damage caused by human activities, with the ultimate aim of assessing the cost required for the maintenance and restoration of the ecosystem extent and condition by comparing the current observed cost and required maintenance cost with what is needed to reach an ecosystem reference level. So it's the same idea that I mentioned before, more in the theoretical part, in the monetary part, which has been applied in France. So in France, they have an extensive biophysical part, and then they have a monetary approximation through the costs, through the maintenance cost, and this ecological debt concept. Conclusion, well, the SEEA, MAIA has used the SEEA, which is now developed as a biophysical standard for the biophysical accounts. Many of the researchers involved here have contributed significantly to the development of this standard. As you know, it was not developed for the monetary part, but we have also contributed in these guidelines that have been developed directly to SEEA and also through another report which we have done in collaboration with NCAVES, which was more focused on the monetary part. And in general, if you go to the river, you will see that each and one of these tasks that I have mentioned are specifically mentioned in the research agenda set up by the SEEA at the end of the document. I didn't have time to show this in detail, but each and every single one of the ones that we have analyzed are within the research agenda of the SEEA for the future, for the coming years. So what we have done can be seen as a first step in completing this research agenda. So thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. Perhaps you stay here, and we perhaps ask, is there any questions from the audience or audience online? So obviously no questions from audience online, but how about here in-house?
Too much information.
Okay, well, I have a question.
Please.
So you have been chairing this work package over 4 years of project. So how do you feel about now at the end of the project and established and we have completed quite a many new pieces of research?
Well, yes, I think as I said at the beginning, we have done everything that we had in our description of work. We have gone beyond that. So it has been a productive project, I would say. And during this project has been interesting because we have had an active role in trying to set up the SEEA system, which has been developed precisely during these years. And our work has been, I think, quite important in shaping the final version. So through our own work and through the discussions that we have been going on, we had a key role in shaping the final version that we have. Moving forward, we also have a key role. Now we have a biophysical part. We don't have a monetary part yet as a standard. So moving forward, I hope that we will be able to have a key role as a group in the future in developing a standard for the monetary accounts, which will be my role, I hope. I will try to work on that. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Okay, if no questions, perhaps, okay, yeah, please. I give you a microphone.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting and very useful. And my question is about future standards regarding monetary valuation. There are many different methods which have been developed in this project and presented. How is it possible to develop a standard for Eurostat from this diversity of method? Do you have an idea or some suggestions?
Yeah, I think not only our project, in problem the SEEA, the problem that it has in the monetary part is not that we don't have methods. It is rather, as you say, that we have too many methods. So it is difficult to get a consensus. So we basically need to decide which ones are the better methods. And this is something the scientific community has to do maybe before there is a scientific standard. So that's why I think it's very important in the coming years that the research community tries to reduce the number of methods, saying, okay, these ones are nice methods, but sorry, there's not the ones we're going to use, and then it has to be a consensus that emerges from the scientific community before the SEEA, the next round of the SEEA can do a standard. Because right now, if you read through the SEEA, there are simply too many methods, and this is what it has been one of the big problems when moving forward to adapt to the standard, is that some statistical office simply said, if you give me that, I don't know what to do, because you're giving me too many options. You have to reduce the options, and that's something that the scientific community has to do. And I think we as a group, or as a part of our big community, have to go in that direction of try to see which ones are the strongest methods. And for that, we need to discuss them in theory and also see how we can apply them, because we need both methods that are strong in theory and that can be applied. Both has to be discussed. That's my personal opinion.
Is there any more questions? How about online? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Alejandro, and we can continue the program. Next, we see on here a presentation about hydrological modeling. Okay. Mm-hmm. Can we get the slides up? Yep.
Yep.
Excellent. And I put it in the presentation.
Okay, thank you. As we heard previously, water flow regulation ecosystem services are quite important. As water regulation ecosystem services, we mean processes like water canopy storage, infiltration of water to soil, and recharge to geological structures, which results in water retention in landscape and slower releases of water to streams, which results in reduction of very high flows, and on the other side, maintaining the low flows in streams. This is something what we and locally supplied by artificial water reservoirs. Comprehensively, we call these kind of processes hydrological transformation. This kind of processes is really hard to measure, or it's even impossible. And moreover, we have to assess some scenarios, because according to SEEA guideline, the value of regulation services is actually difference between scenarios when the service is provided and if it would not be provided. So we definitely need some kind of models for this kind of computations. We did some review, which was published in a paper recently, and it's results of the effort of broader team, MAIA team, and this review highlighted two tools. The first one is very common and well known. It's part of the INVEST set of tools. It's a very simple tool, which on the other hand provides good results for the relative delineating of some hotspots where ecosystem services. Which you? Sorry. Okay. No. So stop walking. Okay, that's easy, fine. It's fine for delineating some hotspots, but these absolute values of outputs are not really suitable for accounting purposes. They are, kind of biased. The second tool is SWOT. It's acronym for Soil and Water Assessment Tool, and this is really complicated model considering large number of processes, and this is more suitable for accounting purposes because the outputs are more sufficient. But this, on the other hand, needs much more expertise in terms of input data preparation, in terms of setting up the model, in terms of calibration, validation model. So needs much more effort to set up this model. Generally, because model always simplify the reality, so SWOT simplifies the area into sub-watersheds for main rivers, and these sub-watersheds are divided into units called hydrological response units, which we consider as uniform in terms of hydrological response. And these units are results of overlay of land use, of soil, and some terrain slope classes. This is fine for accounting purposes because we can consider these units as assets simply. Yeah. And this is also this kind of schematization of area is suitable also for larger scales because it's computationally not that intensive. Yeah. So SWOT is sometimes also used for entire countries or even for entire continents as well. How we can assess the quantification of these regulation services? So we can simply remove the effect of the hydrological transformation in the model as much as possible. We change some parameters like surface roughness, like canopy storage, like direct runoff rate to remove the effect of particular, let's say, particular assets. So we can do this. Particularly for forests, for grassland, for cropland, for urban areas. We can do it for entire area, or you can do it for some particular administrative unit. And this can result for some outputs expressing the effect of particular ecosystems on, in this case, increase of low flows. So when we, for instance, in case of forests, we can assess the effect of removing hydrological effect of forest on actually decrease. This is increase of, but it's actually there is the decrease of low flows in case of grassland or in case of cropland and so on. Then we can somehow transform this to specific services. Like water supply for abstraction, like maybe avoided amount of electricity produced, or maybe number of days suitable for boats, like for goods transport or for recreation. The same in case of high flows. We can then maybe use the value of avoided flooded area, but this is, let's say, more tricky, because we need to transform the change of long-term peak flow avoided into flooded area. SWOT can provide some kind of output about water depth, which can be then somehow processed into flooded areas. But the computation of water depth is very simple inside SWOT. So this is example of some reference flood extent, and the lighter one is in case of removing the effect of forests. But the better solution would be to connect it with hydraulic models, which computes the hydraulic transformation of the discharge, into water depth, but this kind of models are hard to or very to set up. This kind of models is very time consuming for larger areas, so it needs some kind of automatization. I'm working on it now. So this is how just to give you idea how these tables then can look like. This was just experimentally derived for smaller area of Czech Republic for watersheds contributing into Baltic Sea. And this is the effect of particular ecosystems on avoided flooded area. So this is supply table, and use table are in economical units. So this was made actually by overlaying the avoided flooded area with land cover maps simply. As well, we want to track some changes in accounting tables. So in case of ecosystem extents, we simply switch the input land cover map to it must be some coarser land cover map. For instance, Corina land cover. Very important is condition of soils. Recently, there were some maps produced which track some changes in soil properties condition, which are based on machine learning, and for instance, the inputs are or one of inputs are data from Lucas program. And maybe a change in vegetation condition we can consider maybe change in canopy storage derived from leaf area index maybe. So this methodology is still evolving, still in progress. So just simple conclusion. So hydrological models are really important for natural capital accounting. Definitely, this is the way. But the connecting the outputs to particular economic units is still challenging and needs much more effort. So show must go on, and subsequent projects covering the progress of the methodology can be for instance, now integrated life, one nature, or perhaps Selena. That's all from my side. Yep.
Excellent. Excellent.
I'm
Thank
on
you.
time?
Yeah, very much in time.
Very much.
Yeah. So we have plenty of time for questions and discussions. So anybody online? No? Okay. Please, I will give you the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question on basically what was your last bullet point on the challenge, because for me it always seems that in ecosystem services related to hydrology, there is this strong spatial disconnection between the locations where actually something is changing in the landscape. Where an hydrological system is, for instance, being modified, and where the users are, because they're usually much more downstream. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have even talked about that problem a few years ago. So, but I was wondering what conceptual progress did you make in solving this spatial disconnection between the supply of a service and the use of the service in terms of ecosystem accounting?
This is actually what I've shown. Yeah, I remove the effect of the hydrological transformation. Actually, in this case, it was for entire area, and I run the model, and I check the outputs for particular rivers. So the effect of the regulation is pronounced directly to rivers, and then actually you have to then to search where there is some exactly where is water abstraction, for example, in a river, or where is some village which can be flooded, or there are these hydrological units are of course directly connected in some watersheds into to the river. The water budget is summed up for sub-basin, but the effect is also pronounced in other sub-watersheds which which are connected into previous one. Yeah. So still the effect is pronounced. If the change is made in one sub-watershed, still the change is pronounced in lower ones. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, but what about supply equals use? Because that's usually also one of the cornerstones of accounting. And so, if you have one forest upstream, or which is being cut down or not, being restored, so that has a certain effect. But you can have multiple areas downstream benefiting from that, and so.
You want to directly
if a new town is being developed, which also profits, then you have an increased use of that ecosystem service, right? While nothing changes upstream.
No. The effect is pronounced in a river. Yeah. So no, nothing is changed upstream.
If you have a forest which regulates water for a city downstream, so then you could say from the service supplied by the forest is being used by that city downstream.
Okay.
Yes? Yeah. And then supply equals use. But then if another city is developed downstream, even more downstream, and that also benefits from that surface,
Okay.
would you then say that the original forest in the hills is supplying twice the surface?
No. Or okay, in case of flood regulation, maybe yes. But in case of let's say providing the base flow for water abstraction, it may be decreased. Maybe I'm not sure. No, it depends how much water would be abstracted.
Now, I don't have the answer either. Huh? I mean, but this has always been the most difficult issue, I think, with these surfaces. So, yeah. Okay. Luckily, we have the new projects.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. So we take an online question and then we take a question from here.
Thanks. There's a question from Agnes Vary from McGill University in Canada.
Okay.
And I think she's going to put some oil on the fire here. So she's asking more concretely about the presented avoided flooded area table. Does it show the ecosystems providing the ecosystem service or the ones receiving it? And how did you calculate the use of this ecosystem service, which is more or less what was discussed
Use
now.
of ecosystem service. Maybe I can shift back. No. The use table, you mean? Just no general summarization of let me think a sec. How I did it? Okay, generally the avoided flooded area was just the difference between the reference scenario and when forest effect was removed, cropland effect was removed, and the increase of flooded area was computed, and it was overlaid always. It was overlaid with land cover map. Yeah.
So these are the ecosystems producing.
These are producing the service. Okay. So this would be the increase of flooded area if there would not be provided the regulation of the flow. Okay. And simply this was overlaid with land cover map where particular classes of land cover were classified into economical units, and the area was summarized. Yeah, so for cropland, for some construction sites, and so on. Yeah, for households.
Okay, thanks.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, it's very clear. Thanks.
I know.
Okay, excellent. So we have at least one more question.
One more.
Hi, Burkhard from Nature Conservation Germany. What was your experiences with regard to elevation models? You know that flooding often is a question of only some centimeters.
Yeah.
Are the elevation models we have accuracy? How is the accuracy? Can they really be used, or do you have additional surveys on the spot?
Yeah. This is really differs between agricultural land and urban land, because in case of agricultural land, the resolution of the surface model, yeah, the resolution can be coarser actually, yeah, and the results would be sufficient. In case of urban land, also, yeah, there are really small nuances which can cause different flooded area. You can all see there is flooded area derives from coarser elevation model. This is 25 meters, I guess, and this is more detailed hydraulic model. This is derived from laser scanning. Yeah. In case of urban land, there's a need for high resolution. In case of agricultural land, it's not a big problem if you have coarser resolution of the EM.
Hello, thanks for the interesting presentation. I have a question. When you simulate the counterfactuals, or when you model the counterfactuals, where you remove the transformation process from, for instance, a forest, do you do it one forest patch at a time and you add up the supply, or you do it sub-basin, watershed level? How is that?
Yeah, for those examples, I did it for entire watershed. In this case of entire watershed, I did seven simulations. Yeah, for every particular ecosystem. You can do it maybe just for one administrative unit, but do it for every patch, every unit. In case of larger areas, it would be really time demanding. Yeah, because maybe just in this case, there were like 10,000 of units, so you would need 10,000 of simulations. Yeah, you would run the model 10 times with every particular unit change to assess the effect. And when one simulation takes, in this case, it's not that big. It depends on the depends on the time period, but it can be 15 minutes. Yeah, so multiply it by 10,000. Yeah, so.
Because it would be that the effect of a single forest patch would be, it's not linear towards a cumulative effect of all forest patches, I guess.
Mm-hmm. This is cumulative, actually cumulative for all patches. If you want to assess every particular patches, you would obtain 10,000 of these maps. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And now it's time to move for our next presentation. So we move towards the big data issues. So Ian, please.
Yeah, so, okay, this microphone works. Cool. Okay, so hi and welcome to my presentation. I'll be presenting on big data for the SEEA, which I've been working at Wageningen University in collaboration with CBS also on. So I'll take you through first some of the research questions that kind of were formed around this, the results in terms of our conceptual work and the initial spatial models that we developed, and then the more focused work on the deep learning and AI research that we did on for aesthetic ecosystem services and also for biodiversity-related cultural services. So the three kind of guiding questions that we used for this work was, well, how can cultural ecosystem services be defined and spatially modeled using big data for natural capital accounting purposes? Can big data and AI capture the aesthetic services generated by ecosystems in line with SEEA requirements? What is the potential of big data and AI also in capturing cultural services generated by biodiversity? So in terms of the defining and spatially modeling cultural ecosystem services, and this was published in a scientific paper that we wrote. We looked first. We did an inventory of all the different big data sources, or we called them crowdsourced data, in line with the previous research that was done on this topic. And then we also did an inventory of the current cultural ecosystem service concepts as well. And we looked at how crowdsourced data could inform the cultural ecosystem service concept, especially in the context of the SEEA EA. And we then also, to inform that process, we also generated a few cultural ecosystem service models ourselves, using Flickr data, Strava data, and also some citizen science data. And we basically, through that process, and I'll show you that model in a bit closer, zoomed up in a minute, but we came to this, through that process, we came to this definition, which was that, well, cultural ecosystem services through the lens of big data can be considered information flows generated by ecosystems that contribute to cultural experiences. And this was a definition that actually popped up in the literature before, also by the Dutch Spatial and Planning Office back in the 1970s. Also already were thinking about this in terms of information flows, these kind of the cultural experiences that people have. It came at the right time, this work, because we got the opportunity to contribute to the SEEA revision process with the recreational services. And I think that kind of filtered through into the final definition that's now in the SEEA EA. It was a really useful exercise, actually, to use this data to help inform the conceptual work in the SEEA EA. So in terms of like our first go at making a cultural ecosystem service model using big data, we used Flickr as an example. We used Flickr images. This is the island of Texel in the Netherlands, in the Wadden Sea in the north of the Netherlands. It's a very kind of popular tourist destination, but it also has agricultural areas in the middle and urban areas, and then dunes on the west side, and a very famous lighthouse in the north. And we basically looked at the view shed. We calculated the view shed from each of these images that people were taking on Flickr, and then and limited that to one photo per user per day, hence the PUDV, and then kind of aggregated those view sheds on top of each other to kind of come to this intensity, because and in terms of like a quantity that can be kind of scaled up and down, and that's divisible. So this was the model that was produced. You can look at the details in the scientific paper, which I'll show you at the end, the link to that. Anyway, it showed up quite well, the kind of where the popular spots are and where the landscape is most being appreciated by people. Okay, so that was our first go at an aesthetic ecosystem service model, and then we thought, okay, well, we need to look at the AI part of this objective, our research aims as well. So but we wanted to test really whether, because especially Flickr, social media has all these biases. We also wanted to validate that. So and that's why we went to Great Britain, because it has this amazing data set across the whole of the UK, or Great Britain, I should say, where it's people have there's ratings have been crowdsourced as to how beautiful the landscape is, and in terms of scenery. So Yeah, so we decided to test a AI model in combination with Flickr in Great Britain to see if it could capture the aesthetic quality of the landscape. And to do that, we obviously took images from Flickr, and this is this image is just North Scotland and a beautiful bay there. And we applied 2 deep learning models because they're deep neural networks. That's why they're called deep learning. And one of them was just predicting what kind of the probability of what type of scenes or attributes, so hiking, or here you can see some examples, lagoon, they're kind of certain attributes that it predicts for the images. And then also we predicted the scenic quality with a second a second deep learning model. And we combined all that information to produce a final aesthetic quality rating, which in this case was 6.9 for this grid cell. So that was a lot of technical work, and that's one of the main learning lessons from this at the end, is that this does take a lot of technical work, and one of the key things is, well, do statistical officers, do people have enough capacity or knowledge for this? Because, you know, there's this aesthetic quality rating, but what about ecosystem service supply? Is that just a quality rating? No, it's something else. So there was further work done to look at producing actual something like, okay, this ecosystem service, okay, well, what is it? So for now, we're calling it aesthetic utils or utility, which is based on multiplying the quality per grid cell, or per image, I should say, by the quantity of images per grid cell. So you get this idea kind of similar to the idea of like if you buy gasoline, you know, it's the quantity of gasoline you buy, but it's also the quality of it which determines your utility derived from it, because you can drive for longer with better quality gasoline. So that's the idea. Or there's also like the idea of apples, like the better quality apples. 5 better quality apples is more enjoyment for the person. So that's the idea behind this. So that's kind of moving to ecosystem service supply. But one of the key challenges is that, yeah, the cities all heat up, you know, this on the map, because there's a lot of images being taken. So there's this now kind of thought process going on. Okay, well, do we just exclude the cities or the urban areas, which we've done in this case? Do we filter the images also based on those attributes? So it's just to do with nature. Okay, we just take those images. And also, you know, quality, is this like in terms of how people value an image of 10 versus an image of 1? Is that linear, or is it exponential? You know, that this is some empirical work that still needs to be done. And we've been working with the Spanish team also, Fernando and Adrian, on doing a questionnaire to also test the model in Spain, and also kind of explore some of this as well. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting work going on that still needs to be continued. And then moving on to the biodiversity work. So again, this was a lot of technical work, because we had to develop. So we were looking at whether we could predict interactions with individual species in Flickr images, because Flickr has lots of landscape images and sports image, people watching football and taking pictures, but there's also lots of pictures to do with people appreciating, taking a picture of a flower or a bee or some other kind of animal. And that's a great way of, capturing some of these cultural contributions of nature to people's enjoyment, recreational enjoyment. So, but how to do that with millions of images? You need a AI model, an algorithm that can distinguish between the two. So we trained a model basically on a data set of iNaturalist images, which is just to do with people taking pictures of animals, and Flickr images. And we did some changes to the hyperparameters, so we could get we could develop a model that could recognize these images of individual species, but on Flickr, but be a bit more, how do you say, lenient or flexible in terms of seeing more original images. But there's a paper coming out which will have the full methodology in terms of kind of like the results relevant to natural capital accounting. What you see basically is you get this full picture of a whole country here, Great Britain, with a lot of interaction again in the urban areas, because that's where most people are, where things are the most accessible. And you get also a lot of detail, so you can see kind of that in terms of different sources of big data. So in this case, Flickr and iNaturalist, you see that people are interested in different species on different platforms, and you get this detail that you can see these differences and these different like contributions, let's call them, of biodiversity. So in the case of Flickr, there were a lot of people taking pictures of birds, and then on iNaturalist, people are more interested in insects and plants. So there's just a huge amount of data that can be gathered through these techniques. And again, I guess a simple cultural ecosystem service indicator could be interactions per grid cell. But the key issue with that is that in terms of ecosystem accounting, it has to be relevant to it has to be demographically relevant to the whole country. So, and with these data sets, you've got lots of different biases. So there needs to be some more thought work again in terms of, okay, do we look at intensities? Okay, so these things are the most intensely liked on these platforms, so that we can kind of allocate based on national survey data, which it was been done a bit at CBS already. So you can allocate like meters height in national surveys to certain areas where there are these ecosystem attributes that are most appreciated. Okay, so in terms of conclusions and next steps, you can definitely get very high resolution, comprehensive in the sense of large scale, statistics for ecosystem accounting purposes with the use of big data, especially when you consider normally, 10 years ago, it was just about doing very small-scale surveys, and these kind of national level surveys cost a lot of money and are quite rare, actually. I think only in the UK do you have a national survey of recreation done on a regular basis. But I think in the Netherlands also, but a private company does it. So this data, there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of detail, and I think the next steps are kind of looking at how you can combine those methods. But it's definitely in terms of the scale and how easy it is to access, at least from these sources, there's a lot of opportunity. But however, it requires a lot of expertise and relies on these data sources still being reliable. There's the example of Panoramia, which was taken over by Google for Google Maps, and that provided really great landscape images that people were taking, but that was just shut down. So you never know when Flickr might decide, okay, we're going to close our API, the way to access data through there. And maybe that involves some collaboration, direct collaboration between statistical offices and social media companies. I don't know. But it does require a lot of expertise and the data being available. Demographic biases is a key challenge, and there's some really exciting ongoing work going with applying the ecosystem service model in Spain, and the idea is to then apply at European level, also just through this questionnaire to verify the model results. Okay, that's it. Thanks. I can take some questions. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So questions? excellent, at least.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I think it's very interesting, and as you said, it's very complex, at least, to generate this kind of information. So I was wondering if you thought about going one level down and using, for instance, like I think like in Europe, for instance, you have like these habitat maps like Annex 1 or UNS habitats or whatever that provide also kind of a value, or could provide kind of a value, and link that to some other simpler methods instead of directly going for this complex methodology and large computing, as you said.
Yeah. I think it's a good idea. But then we're kind of talking about ecosystem condition or non-use value, like the inherent value of biodiversity. You know, you could say, okay, yeah, there is more biodiversity there, but like there's this economic aspect to the SEEA EA, which is about supply and use, and this direct interaction is actually really important to that. I mean, if we, these recreational models of value are talking about, travel cost method and stuff like that. How far do individuals travel? And then you have, these supply and demand curves. I think that's still really important in terms of cultural ecosystem service models in the SEEA EA. So, yeah, like if you can use these big data sources in a way that's representative of the whole population, you can kind of get closer to this direct use. But that is certainly very relevant for a kind of this indirect use, intrinsic value that can also be part of a set of accounts, I think. Yeah.
Have you studied also the relation between naturalness and the frequency of pictures?
Yeah, so with the aesthetic quality work that we did in Great Britain, we also tested it versus an environmental indicator model, which it didn't have an indicator for naturalness specifically, but it did have different land use. So I think, and also, and I think that was kind of incorporated. That naturalness aspect was incorporated within that. Of course, the model itself also has these attributes of like nature, vegetation, which are kind of linked. But I think what you're talking about is specifically like this indicator of naturalness. There's some research being done on that, I think, in Austria or Switzerland or something.
There is an indicator, hemeropy, which is maybe a known indicator that indicates naturalness of land use.
Okay. Do you know if that's available at the European level or like country specific? I don't know.
No, it's a scientific concept.
Okay.
We have it in Germany, yes,
yeah.
On the German level, but I don't think it is on a European or worldwide level.
Okay, yeah. Okay, but that's in terms of measuring cultural ecosystem services. Yeah.
Well, we made a study asking people what they like most when they travel to the landscape. And the most relevant item was naturalness.
Okay. Yeah.
And therefore, it would be interesting to look at relations between things that are measured by your photos and the results of this study, and also to the question, what is naturalness? Yes. But there are also some studies on what is naturalness, but they are about 30 years ago, where people looked at pictures and then gave scores to the naturalness of the scene they see.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we have one question online and then one in the audience here.
Thanks. So Markku Vitastelu from the Finnish Environment Institute, Syke in Finland, compliments the presenter for a very interesting presentation. Big data and artificial intelligence is a promising method once the challenges will be overcome. And the question is, so people are moving and taking photos only in places they can access. How do you account for the accessibility in your analysis?
Yeah, that's... yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, people's interactions with nature are determined by how accessible that nature is to a huge extent. And I think the question, you come to the question of, okay, is that interaction 5 kilometers from the road worth more than the one 2 kilometers from the road? Because that person has, you know, it's more difficult to get to that point and take that picture. So that's, you know, you could weight based on distance from the road or something, and you could say, okay, well, our concept is that that's worth more to the person because it's harder to make that journey. The same, I guess, as the travel cost method in economic terms. Like, the further people travel, the more it's worth to them, that nature. So, yeah, that's, yeah, I would say.
Okay, thanks. And there's actually a follow-up or a related question, which is going deeper into this problem, from Jackie Hamilton from McGill University. So she says, thank you for the talk. And she asks, do you think these data also reflect the photogenic or ease of taking photos? I can imagine rare aesthetic experiences are captured more in photos, and animals are harder to photograph, like fish. They might be underrepresented. So how can we deal with that?
Yeah, it's another tricky one. Yeah, because I mean, like some of those activities like climbing, rock climbing, I think that's not captured here. So there is this bias towards very accessible, like scenic points, let's say. But again, it's you could say, okay, the rarer the animal or the further away from the road, and it's a super remote location. Okay, that's worth more just because it's more remote. You know, it's kind of the same answer, I guess. But that would be my answer. Initial thoughts, like this weighting process. Yeah. But you have to make assumptions. Yeah, you have to set that down in the methodology. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if there was not a bias regarding the level of knowledge. I mean, if some places are very famous in the population, I guess there is a kind of attractiveness of these places. And so how do you take this point into account? Because yes, if people go in the place which are famous, of course, they live other place. So
I mean, but it's revealed preferences. I mean, revealed preferences through the use of social media. I mean, there's the reality, I guess, and you're just kind of seeing different parts of it. You're never going to see the complete picture. Well, I mean, that's the idea that we kind of come to recently. You know, you need as many of these data sets as possible to get as much of the reality as possible, because certain platforms encourage people to take certain pictures or to go to certain places or to do certain activities. So you need like this layering. You need as many as possible. But I mean, that takes so much computation and so much analysis. So that's a challenge. Yeah, I would say.
Okay, thank you. I think now we don't have more time, but perhaps you can serve your question for the coffee break. So I will introduce now our next speaker, who is Alejandro Caparros. And thank you, Ian. And now we turn to the valuation issues.
So now I change my hat from the work package leader to researcher to present what we have been doing in Spain. And I had talking about monetary evaluation and ecosystem accounting with the experiences that we had in Spain. It is with José Luis Oviedo, Alejandro Álvarez from CSIC, and with Fernando Santos and Adrián García from Rey Juan Carlos, also in Madrid, all based in Madrid. So here I'm going to talk basically about exchange values based on the travel cost method, content evaluation, and choice experiments. How to use these methods, which are well used in environmental economics, well known, how to use them for obtain exchange values that we can use in ecosystem accounting. So in general, travel cost, content evaluation, and choice experiments are all estimate the demand function. At the end, we want the demand function for recreation, for any other good or service, and typically use it to estimate consumer surplus or Higgsien variation. But the thing is, these are not exchange values, as those of you involved in ecosystem accounting know, and we need to come to exchange values. So for that, we have proposed many years ago already the simulated exchange value method used to calculate an exchange value based on the information of this demand, combined with information on supply, and combined with the market structure. So basically, here the idea is to simulate the whole market and do the same than SNA does. When there is not a price for some good or service, the SNA tells you to go to another market and then the price for another market. But we say if this other market doesn't exist, we'll simulate the whole market and see what the price would be if this market would exist. So here we have been, some of you have seen this graph already. So basically we create a hypothetical market where we have a demand. This can be done using travel cost, choice experiment, or content evaluation. And if you assume, for example, now to simplify that costs are fixed, then you can use only the demand to fix a price. If you add the assumption addition that this is a monopolist, make it very simple, then you can set the price that would be internalized in this market, for example, for free access recreation to one particular national park. And then, of course, because you're in an ecosystem accounting context, you need to take into account all the costs involved to deduct man-made inputs, because at the end, the ecosystem service, as you know, is the net. We're going to be interested in the net that we would have when we deduct all the man-made inputs, because the ecosystem services basically is the contribution of nature. So this has been proposed, as I said, many years ago, has been applied several times. And here I'm going to talk, instead of talking what you have, in previous presentations, we have been talking more about our previous applications in Andalusia, which have been concluded. Now, today, I'm going to focus more on the ongoing things. So it will look like we are just starting, but in that sense, it's simply because we are doing essentially the same thing that we did for one region in Spain. Andalusia, we're trying to expand it to all of Spain. And of course, in the process, we are changing some things, hopefully improving some things. So basically, I will not be referring so much on what we have done in the past, which is concluded and published. There have been many publications inside MAIA, where you can go to the full list. It's about 8 or 9 or 10, I don't know how many at the end. So we have many publications which are based essentially on using this method and applying it in Andalusia. So we did two basic applications, although this has been integrated into a much wider ecosystem accounting context in Andalusia, which is a big region in the south of Spain, the size more or less of Austria. So it's already the size of a country. And there what we did is these are the first papers that were published, but there, as I say, is a long list of papers that use this information in an accounting context. So free access recreation. So what we did is we did apply to 10 national and natural parks in Andalusia, in this region, and we assumed monopolistic competition. That means that there are differentiated parks, but in each of them we made a very strong assumption that each natural park has a monopolist in the short run. This simplifies our calculation a lot, and this is one of the things that we have changed in this new application to Spain. And we use content evaluation method in that time, so to show how you can use it. Now we change to a travel cost method. So travel cost methods it's a revealed preference technique instead of a stated preference technique. We have done it already with stated, now we're doing it with revealed preferences. On the other hand, there was also an application which then is also published and used in subsequent publications where we valued biodiversity and landscape values in Andalusia using at that time a choice experiment. Here what we have done now, we have improved together with Fernando and his team, we have moved about the landscape thing, which was not very well defined in ecosystem accounting context. We have given a precise meaning relating it to condition accounts. So we're trying to use it to relate it completely to condition accounts. And that was the contribution of Fernando's team, basically to define this properly, and our application will go in that direction. So what I'm going to present today, as I said, is unfinished work, but it's simply unfinished work in the sense that we have done everything before for Andalusia. It can be done at large scale. We have published it. It is well published in a lot of publications. Now we are moving on to Spain, as I said, twisting some things. So the survey has been done under MAIA, this new survey that I'm presenting, and the calculations, as I said, are partially completed. That's what I'm going to be showing, but publication is not yet done. So we are going to use simulated exchange value for monetary condition accounts, as I said. Basically, instead of landscape, we are talking about condition, trying to make a better connection with SEEA. And biodiversity, we keep focusing on threatened species, as we did in the past. We don't change that part, but we change the part what was called landscape before. We now define it as condition. And for the simulated exchange values to free access recreation, now we're going to focus on 10 national parks in Spain. They're all national parks, which are terrestrial, so in mainland, we exclude the islands. So here what we see, I'll give a bit more detail afterwards, is that now we assume that not everyone assumes that the park is a monopolist, that you are alone. You take into account that there are other parks that may compete with you, and if you set a price, you need to take into account what others will do. So you have this competition going on in some areas and in some areas not. Sorry. So, and this is going to be endogenously, so we endogenously determine where there's going to be competition between parks and where there's not going to be competition between parks, always with this idea of what would happen if a market really existed. So we are always trying to simulate what would be the exchange value if in a situation where you really have to pay to get into the national parks, which you don't pay right now in Spain. So we are simulating what the market would do. But before we simulated it, assuming that each one assumes that they're isolated, they're the only one existing. Now we say, well, the thing is that there are actually 10 national parks, and they would be competing with, so the price should need to take this into account. And as I said before, we're using the travel cost method. This was not included in the original MAIA project, but we have decided to expand it to include this because we think it was important to move beyond the continual evaluation study that we had done in the past and show that it can also be done using a travel cost method. So for that, we have done a survey. The objective has been to analyze recreational use of national parks in Spain, and of course, preferences about condition and biodiversity preservation. A random sample of Spanish adults older than 18 years. The survey was, in this case, conducted through computer application. Our previous application was done in person in Andalusia. This time, we moved to computer application, but we omitted cell phones. And we obtained that our objective was, and we finally obtained it, of course, 1,100 valid questionnaires, which imply 4,400 choice observations because people had to do 4 different choices in the choice experiment. So this is the first part of it. So the first thing we did, as I said, we have 2 parts. One is going to be on condition plus biodiversity. One is going to be on free access recreation, sorry. So first start with the part on condition. Here we provide a text where we give them some time that they have to read it. We control how much time to read it. It's the only way we can see whether they're really reading it, but at least we exclude those who go way too fast. And here we basically explain to them what the situation of the forest is in Spain. So together with Fernando and his team, we decided it was better not to present too many species. It was going to get very complicated, and we focused on broadleaf forest and on coniferous forests. So we are going to focus that because we want to focus the attention of people so that they understand it. It's necessary that they understand the scenario. This is the first important thing. We want to relate it to condition, but also make it understandable. So that's we give them some information, how much in percentage we have of broadleaves, of conifer forest. We give some information on graphs, where they are distributed, some examples of the type of forest that we are talking. And then we explain to them that there are 4 different levels that experts give on condition. So this can be unfavorable, regular, which is kind of a bad translation from Spanish, sorry. This is, of course, done in Spanish, medium, and favorable. So we have 4 levels, which we define as good as we can, so to make it more or less understandable to people what we are talking about. And then we also talk about the 20 species which are in danger of extinction, and we present them pictures of all these species. I don't have the pictures here. So basically, we summarize the situation of the forest into a condition, which is given by experts, and they only I explained what it means in terms of these 4 levels that we have. And then basically they are faced with a choice card where they can basically pay to either maintain or improve the conifer forest, the broadleaf, and where they're also faced with a situation where if they don't do anything, the number of threatened species increases. So basically, we are facing you with a scenario where if you don't do anything, the condition deteriorates in all cases, and the number of species increases. And you can pay to maintain some of them or to even improve them. Even though you can improve them, we are going to focus afterwards on the maintain. So this is the conditional logic that we obtain. Basically, well, everything is very significant. The only thing I want to highlight here, and our bid is negative as it should be. So we have a conditional logic we can work on. And here what we do is we simply estimate what would be the price, the single price, if you would make people pay a single price. So we're trying, in general, we have applied the simulated change value mainly to recreation, where it's easier to apply, but here we're kind of moving to more challenging bits, where you try to do it for condition. But we say what you want is how much people are willing to pay to maintain the current situation, instead of doing for a change. If you do for a change, it gets very complicated. So we're doing them, facing them with a scenario where there is a reduction, we're making them pay for maintaining the current situation. And that's we define it for conifera, broadleaf, and biodiversity, no change in all cases. And then we simulate what would it be the price that you would set if you would kind of internalize this in a market way. So here it's the part where we agree is more difficult to support. It's not so obvious than it is for recreation, but this is what we did here. We are not estimating the consumer surplus. We are estimating how much you could internalize by setting a single price that individuals would pay. And as you see, if you increase the number of the payment, less and less people will pay. Well, initially more people, you get more because people are paying more, but then there's a moment where people stop paying. So there's a moment where you maximize. And that's the one that we would propose for maintaining the condition. So we did also mixed logic. Again, everything works very nicely. Everything is significant. We did also a Latin class, but here I will not go into these details because I don't think they're really necessary for ecosystem accounting. It is enough we do a simple model, and the conditional logic is much easier to work on because you don't need to simulate numerically afterwards. And here is what we did for the travel cost. So again, I'm going a bit fast. But basically what we did is a travel cost where we, with at-home interviews, where we asked the people, where have you been the last year, focusing on the 10 national parks in mainland Spain, in the peninsula, not in the islands, because then, of course, the costs to go into the islands are completely different. So we let them decide let us know where they have been. And, well, fortunately, one of the things we were a bit afraid whether we will have enough people, but yes, enough people came. So about 500 people out of the 1,500 actually visited the national park in the last year. Some of you have been to one of them, some of you to the Sierra de Guadarrama, which is actually the one who has the largest number of visits, is the one close to Madrid. That's why it has the largest number of visits. But we have the visits to all the other parks. And now with this, what we can do is, as I said, estimate how the price would be if you go into a market. Here it is much easier to see how the market would work. So you would have 10 firms basically, you would have 10 ecosystem trustees in each case, that's what the SEEA talks about, ecosystem trustees would be setting a price. And this price would sometimes compete and sometimes not. Sierra de Guadarrama may not compete with Doñana because they're not close. So the distance will be important to see how they compete. The problem is we did not have, our previous application was simplified a lot and assumed that all national parks were a monopolist. This is not realistic, so we started by doing the theory how to do that. And that's what I have been presenting this year in different conferences. This is a pure theory paper on how to do this. So basically here you have, starting with what is called a Salop circle. A Salop circle simply says you suppose you have an ideal country which is a circle. To make it simple, Hotelling proposed a line. This is a circle, very, very simplified. And here you say, okay, we have a situation where you only have 2 parks, and the people, even if you put no price, no one would come from further away than that. Well, then both act as a monopoly. So you can do what we did in the past. So you can forget about others, and each one sets the price independently. But of course, you can have a situation where this national park has all these areas influence, and this national park has all this area of influence. So they will be competing. And because they will be competing, the way you set the price is completely different. We have to do it in the short term, while Salop, who started this originally, in the long term, we have to do change analysis. So we did this, we did the analysis for the short term of that, and you know how to set a price. And this is done with a very, very basic model, as Salop did it in his original paper, which was focused on the long term, as I said. But we have done it also for, I have done it also for count data travel cost models and for discrete chase models. So now the theory is here, we know how to apply it, everything, you just have to apply it. For that, as I say, we have our survey, but unfortunately we didn't have the time to run the whole thing. But for just to show you that it can be done easily, what I also did in this more theory-oriented paper is provide a final simulation, simply saying, okay, let's suppose you have 3 cities, SC1, C2, and C3. We have 3 national parks, and natural parks or whatever, and we have a survey with 180 interviews in different cities, and we simulate where the people came. Basically, it's exactly the same information that we actually have for Spain. And then you run your model and you cannot obtain prices, which here are completely irrelevant because they are just for some imaginary numbers, but we can do exactly the same thing with the survey that we have done in Spain. So we will have different prices for each of these simulated prices for each of these 10 national parks in Spain. So, as I said, I think that I can conclude. We have used a simulated exchange value for Andalusia, for natural parks. Here we assume that it was a monopolist, each of them, that was a strong limitation, and we used content evaluation. We did landscape and biodiversity values in Andalusia, and now we are working on nature-based recreation for all national parks in Spain, at least inland national parks. Here we assume that there's an endogenous competition where it is relevant, and where it is not relevant, there will not be a competition. We set prices as a monopolist in one area, competition clear in another one, and we're working on forest condition, biodiversity values, trying to link it closer together to SEEA, because our landscape was not so closely related to what actually is in SEEA. And as far as we see it, all estimates are compatible with SEEA ecosystem accounting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. So, questions? Do we have online questions? Okay, no.
That was a great presentation, Alejandro. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. Just one question. You ask for willingness to pay to maintain the condition of these 10 national parks. But of course, the answer you would get if you would ask, what are you willing to pay for preserving the parks, it would be quite different, right? Because people would be willing to pay more for making sure the parks would continue to exist compared to avoiding a relatively small loss in condition. So the question is, of course, the question that you ask, of course, determines the willingness to pay. And what exactly are we valuing with this question?
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. Well, first, there was some confusion. So the condition applies not to the national parks, applies to the forests in general. But the question is still relevant. So we're talking about condition. We're not talking about disappearance. So this is something we don't have an answer. As I said before, we have to make proposals and discuss them. So in our previous application in Andalusia, what we were facing you is a situation that the number of hectares decreases. So we actually, that was in the previous question, there was also a choice experiment, but you were faced with a situation that the number of hectares decreases if you don't do anything. So we are kind of paying for the marginal last unit of forest. The problem is this is not very realistic. So it is good, it is ideal in terms of accounting. That's what we did in our first application. But then we thought, well, maybe it's not so ideal because this is a very unrealistic situation in Spain because forests are not disappearing. So we are facing you with something which is not realistic. So maybe that's why, well, first of all, because the other one we did it already, we did it in Andalusia, and that's one reason. And the second reason is because we think that it's also important to do a realistic scenario. And it is much more realistic to say, now I'm facing not only the hectares, but what is more likely to change is the quality of this forest. And then we are trying it this way. So at the end, I don't know what one is the best approach, to be honest, but this is something that we are kind of proposing both in the aim of trying to discuss this in the future.
Thank you. Okay, so we have one question at least online and then one in the audience here.
Thanks. There's actually no online question. I have my own question. So as we know, the use of exchange value is heavily debated also technically within the SEEA documents. And I really appreciate the thorough take on one of these valuation methods to look, the deficits in the detail and how can this be implemented. And I have two questions on it. First of all, an account is meant to capture changes over time or changes between places. And the fact that, like Lars mentioned, if you change questions or you use another monetization technique, this will render very different numbers. Doesn't this add too much volatility to the purpose of accounting compared to a biophysical base account?
Yes, so there's two things. One, you can observe the changes by doing the same question repeated moments in time. So that's feasible. The problem is, that's not a problem, so you don't have to ask about the question, the change, you can ask about what happens in each moment in time. But of course, you're right, if you change the type of question, then you're obtaining different values. The same then if you do a Korean land cover and you change the methodology, you cannot compare anymore. So you are right that we need to standardize the questions that we're asking. The same then we need to standardize what we measure in the Korean land cover. So if you have a Korean land cover that changes all the definitions, then it doesn't work. You cannot have a series. So here it is the same. We would need first to agree, and now I just said we changed it. Well, we are not a statistical office. We are a research institute. So trying different things to see which is one of the best, which one has its pros and its cons. But once it moves into statistical offices, they need to agree on one particular approach. They're saying that they need to agree on one particular approach once to do anything in the SNA. So if you would be changing the definition of consumption of any definition that they are very reluctant to change definitions in the SNA because once you change it, your time series is broken. So here we need the same thing. We need that what came back what we asked before. We need to standardize. We need to agree on what we are going to apply, and then we have to keep it for several years because otherwise you will not have a time series. So I fully agree.
Yes, but I was referring to a more fundamental problem that prices are also dependent on the market and on budgets people have. So the huge rises in energy cost will change the outcomes of this question. So I was wondering shifting from a biophysical and condition account to a monetary exchange value-based account adds uncertainty to the account, and to what extent does this jeopardize the robustness of it? Because the prices are much more influential or influenced by other factors, personal, social groups, income, other prices in the market.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, but that affects to all the SNA. So a liter of gasoline last year was a liter of gasoline this year. The price is completely different. The SNA accounts for this change. So of course it would change, but the same than all the rest of the SNA changes. So the thing is, if you want to do something which is comparable to the SNA, you cannot do better than the SNA in that sense. Otherwise it will not be comparable anymore. So if you're telling me it would be better to have, because energy prices changes, let's forget about all the energy prices in the SNA and let's focus almost on how much the industry uses of liters of gasoline. Well, that's a completely different measurement. So you would it's true that the liters of gasoline are maybe the same this year than last year that the industry has used. But it would change much less than the prices have changed. But that's not what the SNA does. So we have to, because we're trying to extend to some extent the logic of the SNA, we will have the same problems. But yes, of course, it's going to be much more volatility.
Okay, so we will have one more question in this session.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And I think I'm Christine Grimsrud, I'm from Norway, and we did something similar to look at forest plantations in Norway. And a challenge we had when we looked at the condition was that its biodiversity is quite correlated with the type of forest that you have. So I was very curious to see how you avoided this correlation in the choice experiment. And another thing, I think it's quite interesting questions regarding willingness to pay to improve the condition of this ecosystem or these national parks, and perhaps maybe this is something for policy for improving natural capital assets, I guess, as a policy input to that. And I don't know how maybe you could say something about the value in terms of degradation of this ecosystem, how much people are willing to pay, if they were willing to pay to improve it. That's just a thought.
Yes, so, well, about the first question, you're right, there are correlations. We were not able to avoid them, so we're just, well, accepting them and try to deal with them econometrically afterwards as good as we can. But you're right, there is a clear correlation that if you improve all forests, you will probably also improve biodiversity. But because here you have the option to improve one forest and others not, the correlation is not complete, but there will be a correlation. We will have to need to deal with that. You're fully right. So this is something that we did. So the threatened species are very particular, and they are maybe not correlated necessarily with the general condition of the forest in Spain. So that's why it still makes sense to separate a program on one particular species which is endangered from a program which is for the whole of Spain, the condition. But this is a problem that we have to deal with and accept. So yes, that's a limitation, I fully agree. Whether we can talk about the degradation, yes, most likely, because we have, in principle, we have focused, as I say, on maintaining and improving. You can always extend to the degradation, but that's not where we focus. So we would be extending beyond what we have studied. We have studied maintaining and extending. Why have we studied maintaining and extending? Because at the end we consider that for accounting purposes the most interesting value is the one of maintaining. And then we look, instead of focusing only on maintaining, we extend it a little bit, but not too much, because our real focus is on the maintaining situation. That's what we consider the most relevant one.
Okay, thank you. I think time is up. So I want to thank you all the speakers, so perhaps we can keep applause.